Okay, so I'm currently working on this material. It's not finished, but what I thought I would do is do a video on how to get just this leaf cover, which I've actually got as a separate material right here. And the way that I made it was it's got this built-in alpha, and you can go ahead and lay it on top of whatever other material you want to use. So I've actually got it combined with a couple of other materials here. And we can go into our Explorer and take a look at how I made this. And you can see that we've made it using these two effects maps. Now, we could have done it just with one, but the reason I use two is because I've split it up between two sets of colors, and what that allows me to do is then further mix those colors. So you get some nice color variation. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and build this material, and it runs off of this mask, which we've then pushed out to an output node. And this mask will then allow us to more easily integrate it with whatever other materials we're choosing to use it with. So without further ado, let's begin. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get ourselves some leaf shapes. You can draw them yourselves. Well, this looks pretty nice. And it doesn't have to be big because we're going to be actually manipulating it a bit ourselves. I'm doing it as a, as a quick way of just getting some shapes in here, but you could just as easily draw your own. So I'm going to copy this image, and then I'm going to go ahead and move it to Photoshop. So here we are in Photoshop, and we're just going to go ahead and make a new image. And I'm going to make it 512 by 512 because there's really no need to have these any bigger than that. I should have made that black. And now I'm going to just paste in the leaves that I got. I want to have one leaf per square. So I'm going to go ahead and make this image larger so that it fits, so this kind of, one of these will fill up a 512 by 512 space. So probably something like that. And we'll hit enter, and then I'm going to Control A, Control C, and then I'm just going to paste this in place by doing Shift Control V. I'll turn this one off. I'll come back to my original layer, and I'll just go ahead and move down the line and do 4 of these. So I think I like this one better. So again, Control A, Control C, Shift Control V, turn it off, find our third one, and repeat the process. Okay, so now I'm just going to get rid of this one altogether. So now we have these 4 leaves. Before we go any further, because we did enlarge it, we have these dirty areas here. So while we have this nice and simple, I'm just going to go ahead and clean this up. The easiest way to do that right now is to literally replace it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get its outline, and then we're just going to refill it. So let's just get this so it fills up the entire field. And invert our selection. And I also want to take a look at those edges. Let's see, I want to see an overlay. So I think I want to smooth that edge out a little bit, just so it's not quite so pixelated. And now we're going to add a layer, and we're just going to fill this with white. And get rid of that one. So we can actually take a look and see what we made here. And we now have this leaf shape, which is much cleaner looking than the original that we had without any of this pixelation. And that's the first leaf in our series. So I'm going to delete our old layer, and we're just going to kind of repeat this process. So again, I'm using my wand tool. I'm going to use my polygonal lasso to just pull all of this selection out to the edges. And invert my selection, get a new layer, and fill it with white. And then I'm going to get rid of this one. So I will now go down the line and finish the other two, and I'll join you when I'm done. Okay, so now we have a layer for each one of these leaves. And we're basically done, but what we're building is, we want a little bit of height information in here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gray this out ever so slightly, and we want to kind of add maybe some sort of veins in here. And we can do that, we could do it in any number of ways. I think I'm going to use the pen tool to just draw in just a spine in here. You know, you can go and do more details with the leaves if you. I'm just going to do this one spine here, but you can go ahead and add a whole bunch of things. And we're going to put this on another layer, and I'm going to stroke this. Well, first I'm going to do brush strokes. I want to see what my brush is like. So that's a pretty good thickness. So I'll come back to my pen, and we're going to stroke the path. I'm going to use my brush, and I'm going to simulate pressure. Oh, you know, I want to use white. So let's try that again. Stroke path, simulate pressure with a brush, and I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to come back here, image, adjustments, hue, saturation, lightness, and I can now start to drag this down a little bit. And that makes this little ridge, just hitting enter to get rid of that. And that gives me this nice little ridge in through here for my leaf. I'm pretty pleased with that. So I think I'm going to merge these two guys together. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing to the other leaf. You know, let's get them all the same grayness first. So we'll start with that. And I'm going to come back into this hue, saturation, lightness, and I can see the two of them next to each other. And I'll just get it so that they match. And we can go down the line and just match those hues up. Okay, so that looks pretty good. We'll get rid of this top one. And we can give this guy a little spine, so we'll put another layer in there. We can use our pen tool again to give it a little bit of a spine. And again, we can stroke the path with a brush. Hit enter to get rid of my path and merge the two layers together. And down the road we go. So again, we add a layer, pen tool to create a nice spine. Stroke the path, and merge the two layers together. Oops. And this one, go down like this. So now we can save each one of these out to a bitmap that we can then go ahead and use in our substance designer. So we'll call this leaf 1. And we'll call this one leaf 2. Okay, so now we've created these bitmaps, and we can move to Substance Designer, and we can begin to incorporate them into our effects map. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to create a new substance. So I'm going to come in here, we're going to use the PBR, let's call it leaf cover. And we'll keep all this stuff. We're actually going to end up adding at least one more output node. And this is our basic template here. And what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and link. I mean, we could import, but I'm going to go ahead and link those bitmaps that we just created. So if we do decide to update them in Photoshop, they will show up right here. So that's made a new resources folder for us, and we can go ahead and drag these guys. That's a little irritating. I think we're going to have to move this to its own section because it keeps trying to, it's every time we look at it in the Explorer, it's trying to give us the information here, and that's why I keep switching out like that. So we're going to pull this here, and I'm actually going to switch that to be down there because that's where I'm used to it. And we now have these bitmaps that we created in Photoshop. The first thing we want to do is we want to change them into grayscales. Now, we could do this all with one effects map, but we're going to do it with two. And the reason we're going to do it with two is, as I mentioned in the beginning, it gives us a bit of a better color mix when we can blend it. At least I think so. So instead of having 4 input images set up on the same effects map, which would really give us the same, it would give us the same mask if we did them all 4 on 1. It's really only for the color that we're splitting them up. And because it's exactly the same, I'm going to save myself a whole bunch of time, and I'm going to do this one first, and then we'll just copy the effects map and plug in the other two because they are literally exactly the same. So to do our effects map, we're going to right click and hit Edit Effects Map. And this brings us in to the effects map itself. And what we're doing is really very straightforward. I'm going to, with this node highlighted, just to save some time because I know it'll do it automatically, I'm just going to hit quadrant, and it's going to attach all 4 noodles to that quadrant, and I'm going to do it again, and then I'm going to do it again. And now, because this is really determining the size of our images, so each time we do this, it re-quadrants each one of those quadrants, and they just get smaller and smaller and smaller. So if you wanted larger leaves, you would just do less of this. Now, without having this highlighted, I'm going to go ahead and get another quadrant. and we can start setting this one up. And once we've set this one up, because each one of these quadrants is going to do the same thing, only to one of two images, again, we're going to set up this one, and then we're just going to copy it out for the other three spots. So let's start. Now, oh, I can see right away that we have to deal with something. We forgot to go back into our leaf cover. We forgot to change this to grayscale because it's showing me color information. So once I switch this to grayscale and go back to my effects map, you'll notice that we now, instead of having RGB alpha here, we only have color luminosity. So for our pattern, we're going to use input image. And let's take a better look at our information here. So here's our it's by default. Once I put input image, by default, it's going to go with input image 0. And we'll leave that for now. But if we wanted to change it to the other one, we would do that. So two of these are going to have 0 and two of them are going to have 1. And this is really the only thing we're going to change out as we move down with these copies. Right, so let's start randomizing our effects map to start getting these leaves to look a little bit more natural. Right, so I've got that highlighted. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come into our pattern offset. And I'm going to hit empty function. And then once I've hit empty function, it's going to allow me to edit it just by clicking there. Now what we want to do here is we want to take these little leaves and we want to have them generate randomly. And this is a very simple function to make. So we're going to get a float, and I'm going to set this to 1. And then we're going to want some random numbers. So let's get into function random. Now, if I wanted the same number for my x and my y value, I would only use one of these. But I want a different number for my x or my y, so I'm going to just hit Control-C to copy it, and I'll paste out another one. And it'll always attach it, it'll repeat the attachment, so that's a really quick way of doing it. Now, this is a float 2 result. So the offset, it's an x and y value, it's a float 2 result. So we're going to need to vector these numbers into a float 2. So we'll put 1 into the x, 1 into the y, and then we right-click and set it as our output node. And all of a sudden, our leaves have stopped being in a grid. So that's a good sign. However, you will notice that they are all exactly the same size, and they're all turned in exactly the same direction. So those are the other two things that we're going to have to take a look at. So we can come back to our effects, come back to our quadrant, and just go down the line and see what we can do next. So pattern size, that's another one. Again, we're going to make a function. There's no right or wrong answer for this. You could probably find a function that will work well for you if you don't like what I'm doing. But basically, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to randomize the size. So again, we know that we're gonna need a constant. We also know that because we're dealing with random stuff, we're also going to need at least one random. And right now, let's just see what happens if we set this as our result. Obviously, we're going to need another vector float 2, because just like the other one, it's going to want, see right now if you put, it won't let you set it as an output node because this is a float 1 result. So we're going to have to take this and turn it into a float 2, and now it will let you set it as an output node. So again, let's examine what's going on. We have now randomized our size. But for the purposes of this particular image, this isn't really working because I've got some really big ones, which is fine. I've got these guys, which is fine, sort of. They're kind of on the small side. But then we've got these tiny little minuscule ones. And that's not really working at all. Because with leaves, yeah, sure, they're different sizes, but they're all kind of more or less the same size if they're coming off the same tree. And, you know, this you can do however you want to do. There's a million different ways. There's no right or wrong answer. This is the answer I came up with. One of the things that we're going to need to do is we're going to want to compare if something's bigger or smaller than the ideal size that we want. So we know we're going to need a comparison. I'm using a greater than, a smaller than would do. And I'm going to get another constant. And this one, I'm going to set to 0.75. Because I kind of want that to be sort of a, I mean, it's not going to be a hard floor, but it's going to be kind of a soft floor for what we're doing. So I'm going to set up, well, you know, before we do this, this is a Boolean. The white is a Boolean output. And we're going to set up an if-else statement. So this is going to be our condition for an if-else statement. So I'm saying that if the result here is greater than or equal to 0.75, so if this random number, which is generated between 0 and whatever number you've put in here, if this result is greater than 0.75, go ahead and use that result for our output. If it's less than 0.75, we now have to tell it to do something else. And again, there's no right or wrong answer, but I just want them bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and add a number to this. So I'm saying that if it's bigger than 0.75, use it. So I don't want this number here because I don't want it too big. I'm going to call this 0.6. So some of them are going to end up being bigger than 1, but that's okay too because we're really just kind of going for a general leaf size. And so if this number is less than 0.75, you're going to take the original number, add 0.6 to it, and that's going to be the result. So what this has done now is it's either giving us something that's no smaller than 0.75 or a number, you know, or if it's smaller than that, it's just adding this to it. So sometimes it's a little bigger, sometimes it's a little smaller, depending on what it is. But none of them are too tiny. In fact, we can make this a little bit bigger, and those really small ones will sort of get a little bit bigger. So that's fine too. We have now done our size, and the only thing that we have left to do at this point is the rotation, because they're still all facing in exactly the same direction. Now, there are two things here, but you'll notice this is actually the same number. One of them is dealing in degrees, the other one's dealing in turns. So unlike the other two results, this is actually going to be a float 1. And we want to randomize that as well. So come up here, empty function. Where did it go? There we go. Click on it. And this one's easy because it's talking about turns. So a full turn is 1. And since this is a float one, we can just go ahead and set this as our output node. So now it's giving us each one of these, it's turned randomly on 360 degrees or one rotation. And there we have it. So we have one of the quadrants done at this point. We've got our offset, we've got our size, we've got our rotation, and we have it set to input image. So if we take this and we do Control C to copy it and paste it out 3 more times, and we hook these guys up, we now have a full complement of our little leaves. The only problem is it's all the same leaf, and we actually have 2. Now, the way the quadrants work is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. No right or wrong answers here either. I would like to have them done kind of in a crossways fashion. So that means that 1 and 4 are the same, and 2 and 3 are the same. So I've already got input image 0 sit in here. So I'm going to take these 2 middle ones, and all we're going to do, oops, did not mean to do that. All we're going to do is come down in here and switch this to input image 1 and switch this to input image 1. And now when we come back and look at our leaves, it's actually a mixture of the 2 leaf shapes that we have in here. And that is the basic effects map. So we've done this one, and we're basically going to copy it. So I'm going to hit Control C, Control V, and we're just going to switch out the inputs. And now we're going to get the exact same effects map, just working on different images. Now, I said they're exactly the same, and they are like 99.9%, but you will notice there's a couple of things. Because we didn't do this as 4 separate inputs on the same effects map, it's actually applying the same functions to these different images, and the randomization is exactly the same here as it is here. And we do want to blend these together to get a result for the mask. We want them separate for the color, but we want them blended for the mask. And if we take a look, I'm just going to use a lighten blend, so that's going to, whatever the lightest color is, that's the one that's going to show up. You'll notice that it's basically just taking the bigger image because they're literally laying on top of each other. There's a couple of things that we're going to do to this second second effects map that will let us kind of make it a little bit different. The size and the rotation, we can leave all that alone. But what I do want to do is get in here and change the offset. So for the second map, I think what I'm just going to do is I'm going to go down the line, and I'm just going to change the offset on each one of these. The constant, I'm just going to change it to 2. So as it does the randomization, it's going to pick different numbers, because instead of picking a number between 0 and 1, it's going to pick a number between 0 and 2. And that is automatically going to make it different from the original one. So if we take a look now at this blend, all of a sudden we can see that it's actually very different, and you can see both of the leaf types in here. The other thing, I'm looking at this, I think I want these guys a little bit bigger. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to edit this effects map. It's only going to have one up at a time. And I think what I want to do here is work on the size. So let's come back in here, and I'm going to bring this number up a little bit, and I'm going to bring this number up a little bit, and that should, and maybe even bring this number up a little bit. And that should give us some bigger leaves in through here. But again, you know, it's just one of them, one of the leaves, like one set of leaves looked like a whole lot bigger than the other set, which is kind of why I did this. But again, this looks pretty good. And you can also go, you know, you can do a lot more detailed work on this. Obviously, I'm just doing this as a demo. But if I was actually going to be thinking about it for material, yeah, I might fine-tune it a little bit more. But for now, this is great. So the next thing that I want to do is I kind of want to turn this into a mask, because right now, if we use this as a mask, it wouldn't be a very good one. And this, again, this is something that's going to work great for our color, because once we put this into a gradient mask, this is actually going to give us some rich colors, because we've got a variety of different grays in here. And as they overlap, it's going to give us some opportunity for some interesting color variations. But as far as masks are concerned, that's not going to work for us at all. So I'm going to just get a levels node in here, and I'm going to just make it more black and white, which is really what I want it to be. And I'm just going to get rid of all those grays. And we're just going to make a proper mask out of it. So find that spot, and I really want it more or less, I just really want it straight up white. There we go. So that looks pretty good. I want to take a closer look at it. If I had a second screen, I'd be doing this on my second screen, but that looks pretty good. Now, we haven't looked at this in our 3D view yet, and I'd like to hook that up now so that we start to get an idea of what it's going to look like in 3D. For the moment, I think I'm just going to turn on the base color. Now, what's going on with this map, it's a good start, but one of the things that you see with leaves is that by the time they're on the ground, they're usually kind of messed up a little bit. And the way we have this now, this mask, is that each one of these leaves is actually perfect. So what I'd like to do with this mask before we start moving into colors and bumps and all that other stuff is I want to perforate it, but kind of in a random way, so that I'm kind of perforating it overall, which is why because if we put holes in our leaves and we did it here, each leaf would have the exact same set of holes, which kind of defeats the purpose. So we have to wait until we've mixed them all together before we start cutting out bits of it. And it's actually pretty straightforward. Again, we're gonna cut out from that mask. I'm going to go to library, and I'm going to look for noise. Oh my, this is the first time I've used, they've added some things. I just downloaded the latest 2018 spring version. So let's see what we have here. This is probably pretty good. Because I'm looking to sort of chop these up a little bit. So I think before we do this, let's make it a little bit smaller. And we're going to get a transform 2D. And let's, I don't know, let's go 25%. Apply width, apply height. And let's get another blend node in here. and just cut some bits out. So we can see and we're going to get a levels node in here. And I want to look at this one. And now I'm going to use that levels node to start cutting some sort of little holes out of that. So it's mostly white. We're just, let's hook that up so we can see it up here. So we're just kind of messing with some of them. And because we're doing it this way, some of them stay perfectly fine. And other ones, you know, they've had some weathering damage to them already. And they're getting kind of messed up. So depending on how messed up you want them, you adjust that mask accordingly. So that looks pretty good. They look like they've been on the ground, they got rained on a couple times, and they're starting to mush out a little bit. But then some of them are okay. So I'm pretty happy with that mask. So that's the basics done. And before we finish up this video, let's just go ahead and actually make an output node for that mask, because if we ever use this with another material, we're going to want this mask, because as we blend it with other things, it's going to come in useful to separate out this material potentially, whether we're making, I don't know, subsurface scattering or whatnot. You can use that as a way of blocking out anything else from other materials. So we've made this output node. We come into its usage and we create an identifier. So we're going to call this mask. We can create a label called mask. And last but not least, actually assign its usage, and we'll assign it to mask. So that will be that. And we'll pick it up in the next video.